joining us today in this session. Hopefully it's exciting and you get some new insights, you meet some new people to work with, build some collaborations while you're here. We have I think a star-studded group of people presenting today. First though, my name's Kirk Larson. I'm with the Conservation X Labs in the United States, joined by...
I'm Amy Rosenthal, and I come from Planet, the satellite data and platform company. And we're so pleased to be here.
And this session was co-developed with Ali Swanson from Conservation International, Seamus Lombardo from Planet Labs, and Meredith Palmer from Yale University.
Woo-woo!
So, all right, so what are we going to do today first?
Yeah, Kirk, I'm so glad you asked, because we were so pleased to see so many of you sign up. As a result, we had to change rooms, so let's hear it for you. You're going to be stars of the show today. But the purpose is, as we know, as we're seeing all the different kinds of conservation technologies that are on display in the sessions, we're trying to bring those data streams together to answer big questions like, where and how should we influence supply chains for business? How should agriculture modify what it's doing in order to improve environmental outcomes? How can we improve conservation? And do we know if our investments are really working for the outcomes we all desire? That takes many different kinds of data. And that's why we're here to talk to you today about multimodal data fusion and how it can help to accelerate our insights, getting to those insights, and putting them towards action. What does that mean, and how does it look?
Fantastic. And how are we going to do this? Well, this is a three-part session that we have for you today. First, it's going to be 3 case studies, followed by some short Q&A. And that will be followed by a short panel discussion. But most importantly, the last third of this will be breakout groups where you'll talk amongst yourselves. And hopefully that's the most rewarding and a co-developed section would help. So as you're listening to the case studies, as you're listening to the Q&A, and as you're listening to the panel, think about what resonates with you and reflect on the conservation questions that you've been asking yourself and outcomes that you desire from your work. And would these methods that we talk about in the case studies and in the panel, are they appropriate for your situation? Or integration and data fusion techniques, would they improve your confidence, increase your insights? Would they add complexity or costs unnecessarily? Or perhaps decrease costs and increase efficiencies? So thinking about those as we talk through the day, and then bring those to your discussion groups in the latter third. And after that, Amy and I and Ali will come back up here and discuss what we've heard and share back out. And hopefully these are things that you can take with you home and into the field.
So it's a real joy to be with you today. We can't wait to hear your reflections and insights. But for now, we want to hand it off to our colleague Meredith for the next section we have on.
Happy Friday, everybody. Speaker notes are going to be doing a heavy lift for me because it is the last day of this conference. My name is Meredith Palmer. I'm from Yale University. I am super excited to be here, your MC for this conversation, helping us to surface some of the barriers and challenges and opportunities and new horizons in data integration. So as Kirk and Amy just said, we're going to start off with a couple of case studies. So bringing in some practitioners, people who are out there in the wild, collecting this data, trying to draw insights from these diverse biodiversity data streams. Hopefully we'll get some cool insights. Hopefully we'll get some gripes. They're here to kind of surface what we'll then discuss in the fireside chat in terms of potential solutions. So up first, I do need a new slide. Corinne, can you give me a new slide? Here we go. I don't know who's up first. We're going to find out. But then I will introduce them. We have 3 speakers. I'm going to do them one by one as they come up on stage. Hopefully at the end we'll have a couple of minutes for all of your heavy-hitting questions before we move into the next section. Oh, okay. One more slide. This is what we're doing. Excellent. Okay, Corinne, you are up first. Excellent. So our first speaker is Dr. Corinne Vruzendorp, the Director of Science at Conservación Amazonica. Corinne is an ecologist with 3 decades of experience working in the Peruvian Amazon. She's the director of science for a number of Peruvian NGOs. I believe you manage a number of research stations out here in Peru. And so today she'll be sharing some of her work on multimodal monitoring approaches that are being used to inform conservation planning in Amazonian landscapes. So thank you, Corinne.
Thanks, Meredith. Yep, that's me. And I'm going to talk about a place called Los Amigos. This is a biological station in the Peruvian Amazon. But I'm hoping that what I talk about is going to be relevant for a bunch of you. And when I say Los Amigos, I actually am talking about both a biological station, which is about 450 hectares, and a big conservation concession, which is about 146,000 hectares. And we're doing research in both of these places. And the sorts of technologies we've put into the field are like the sorts of things that everyone is putting into the field. And we really wanted to ask ecological questions with those technologies. So we have set up a bunch of camera traps in different ways. Some of them are in these grids where every kilometer we have paired cameras. This was originally set up by Matthias Tobler from the San Diego Zoo. They were recensused by a guy named Andy Whitworth from OSA Conservation, and we learned something incredible. In like a 20-year span, we saw a real change in species abundances, and we actually saw an ecological release. So initially we had a whole bunch of jaguars and white-lipped peccaries, and then we saw that shift to way more pumas, deer, and collared peccaries. We also are looking at colpas, salados, so these salt licks, and so we have data from who shows up at those places. And these were really local ecological questions. We also put out acoustic recorders, and we use those acoustic recorders to figure out something about how tinamous, these are passive acoustic recorders, and we figured out something about what the soundscape looks like and how sounds are saturating over time. You can see those white strips. Those are friajes. That's when you get these real cold fronts come in and nothing is singing. But we figured out that tinamous are dividing time and space spectrally with their calls. And then we started thinking about, like, okay, we know something about Los Amigos. We were invited by Amy and Seamus and others to participate in something called Amazonia. Coming soon, people. This is going to be incredible. And we started thinking about, like, what do these results mean for the rest of the Amazon? And we had help from Sarah and Tim at MIT, and they said, well, let's look at these data you've already collected and see if I can say something, or AI in English, see if AI can say something about it. So Amazonia is a play on words. And they were able to look at these data and really generate occupancy models from the camera trap data, from the acoustic data, looking at satellite data, and they could actually say something about the data that we had already collected. This is definitely a work in progress, but they were able to pick out some of these ecological features in the landscape. And this is a landscape that when you look at it from space, you can see here, these are, this is Greg Asner data. You can see in red are the terraces, the rest is floodplain, there are these salt licks. And this AI analysis was able to pull that out. But my real concern is we didn't sort of set out to ask a question with AI. And now the next concern is that we're being asked to be a part of sort of these big research networks around AI tools, so that I also am not sure whether they have a real, like, underlying ecological questions. And so in some ways, I'm echoing a little bit the talk that Sarah gave this morning about, like, let's make sure we're thinking about ecology and not just about cool tech. And I think we need cool tech. I think that cool tech needs to be distributed. We need to be asking the same questions in different places. We're lucky that we now have a collaboration with Project Providence. This is sort of in the Amazon. This was born in the Amazon, this technology. It's at the Instituto Mamiroa near Tefe in Brazil, and they've set up these really cool modules that are sending acoustic data to the cloud. Those things are being analyzed. And we're now the first Project Providence node outside of Brazil. There's also ones that have been set up in Bolivia. And we'd love to know, like, what question we're helping to answer. And the same thing is true for Sparrow. So we now have a Sparrow at Los Amigos. It's super cool. Every morning I can get up and get into the Sparrow database and see what animals walked by. We can hear sounds. That network is expanding. There's now a Sparrow in Peru. There are several in Colombia. There are going to be ones in Africa, and it's hopefully going to be in lots of places. And at the same time, I'm not sure what question we're trying to ask. And so my big point here is, yes, we should be putting technology into the field. Yes, we should be reanalyzing or looking how AI can help us look at data that we've already collected, but I want to make sure, underline, we need to make sure we understand what sort of questions we're trying to ask. And with that, I'll close. Was that what you were waving at me for, like, stop talking? Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent gripes. Here we go. All right, guys. So introducing our next speaker now, I have the privilege of bringing Jonathan Grocott up to the stage. Jonathan is a large carnivore ecologist and technologist who has recently submitted his PhD at the University of Exeter. Clap, 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 clap. And will be starting a new postdoctoral position at the University of Oxford in their technology and innovation space, right? So as an ex-large carnivore ecologist, I've been following Jonathan's work quite avidly. He's very involved in leading these exciting multimodal technology surveys in Africa for studying populations of lions and leopards. And I believe that's what we're going to be hearing about now. Thank you, Jonathan.
Awesome, thank you very much. Clearly, from this photo up here, I do my fieldwork based as Rambo. With Ray-Bans and a headband on. Yes. So what I'm going to do today is talk very, very briefly about some work that I did do in Tanzania as part of my PhD. I think what's firstly that I really want to show is that none of this work would have happened without an absolutely fantastic team behind me with an awful lot of collaborators and supporters, and it's really important to acknowledge these, and I want to give them their comeuppances right now. So what did we do? Well, as a PhD student with not a lot of money, but with some hopefully big ideas, I needed these collaborators to do this really cool research. So in 2023, I ran the first large-scale bioacoustic, so passive acoustic monitoring survey for large African carnivores in southern Tanzania in Nyerere National Park. And what we did, what was quite cool about this at the time, was that we also paired the passive acoustic monitoring with paired camera traps. Now, surprisingly, this hadn't been done before for large African carnivores. The acoustics hadn't been touched basically since the 90s, which is staggering given the fact that lions and leopards produce some of the most iconic recognizable sounds in the wildlife kingdom. Surely we should be able to detect them over several kilometers away. Why are we potentially using cameras instead of acoustics? Which is kind of the rationale behind this. As part of this talk, we were asked to say what our direct, specific conservation research questions were. Now, if I'm being honest, I didn't have any. What I wanted to do was put cool tech out for new reasons, and I found a niche that potentially would work really, really well, which is what we did. But because, as I say, I was a small little PhD student, the collaborators made this happen. So the technology that we used were low-cost caracals. If you don't know them, they are custom-built ARUs and we used paired camera traps as well, which was the massive supports by Lion Landscapes and Oxford. Now, this is a small little example of our paired camera trap and ARU station. Basically, what I wanted to do was get the most directly comparable data. So what I did was put the acoustics basically on the same trees as the cameras. And what the idea was is that we'd see what was happening in these concurrent data spheres. And what was really nice, we can see here, this is a diagram from a paper that I published last year called The Secret Acoustic World of Leopards. What we showed is that whilst leopards were walking past the cameras, enough of them were also vocalizing. So suddenly, you can identify leopards not only by their spot patterns, but we had their concurrent audio. And so we had labeled data that we could pair between the image of a leopard and what it sounded like. And we were able to show, therefore, that individual leopards could not only be identified by their spots, but also by their roars. And these are the kind of basic questions that I want to answer that might hopefully improve how we can monitor carnivores in the future. So that's kind of where I see my sphere. How can we use technology to improve the efficiency of how we monitor species in a space where there's not a lot of money, but they exist over massive amounts of spatial temporal scales? And so we were also asked to talk about the challenges. Now, I think the one on the left, yes, your left, would be pretty frequent. We've all had field vehicles that have had quite their problems. But if you're running multi-tech surveys, the chances of these problems affecting you do double, they triple if you're using more and more, and it's an important thing to consider. Equally, you'd put out more technologies and devices, and the chances of something like a lion chomping down on one of your devices equally increases. Although, having said that, I've got some absolutely brilliant audio of this lion chomping down on my acoustic unit, scraping it about for about 10 minutes, then you get like 30 seconds heavy breathing, just 30 seconds later, everything goes dead because it's ripped it off the tree and is now chomping on it like a steak. But other than the practical difficulties and challenges of this, we also need to think about the fact that when you're collecting multi-tech data, you're getting more and more different spheres of data which need to be harnessed in different ways. You need more SD cards, you need more external hard drives, you need different AI models that are going to be used to analyze these data approaches. And because there was nothing in the sphere for bioacoustics for large carnivores, we had to build all of that ourselves. So I think that's something that I want to finish on, is that when you are starting to use multi-tech surveys, you need to think beyond just what's cool and go, oh, that's shiny and fancy like a magpie, and go, actually, what's the practical applications of this? Do I need all of these different multimodal technologies? Obviously, I think yes, because they're really cool, and like, you can get so much fascinating data. But the stuff that you need to do post-processing is worth the consideration. Is it worth the time and the money and the resources and the expertise that are necessary for that next step? So with that, I think I'm going to pass over to Jeremy.
Thank you, thank you. I always appreciate really cool as a motivating technique for doing any kind of science. So our final case study will be presented to us by Dr. Jeremy Cusack. Jeremy has been in very high demand at this conference due to the incredible portfolio of work that he's leading at the biodiversity organization, Ocala. Jeremy's a quantitative ecologist. He specializes in collecting, analyzing, and deriving insights from biodiversity data. And at Ocala, he's overseeing the design and implementation of monitoring strategies that deliver science-based actionable outsights. Guys, Friday. Okay, here we go. Jeremy, hopefully you can do a better job than I did. Please come up. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Meredith. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks to the organizer of this session. So I am going to share the very first project that Ocala was involved in. So Ocala started in 2023, and we are basically dedicated to designing and implementing biodiversity monitoring strategies that deliver the best biodiversity data possible. We use a lot of different kinds of sensors, and we try and integrate the data to sort of paint the best picture possible of biodiversity in a given area. So one of the first projects we were involved in, we were a sort of new company we wanted to impress. So we took on this 270,000 hectare project in Gabon. And this area, the South Estuary concession, which is just south of Libreville, the capital, and it's situated between two protected areas, so Bonkara National Park and Wonga-Wonge Reserve. It's an area that had been logged, and it's an old logging concession, but the owners and the government of Gabon were really interested in sort of quantifying the biodiversity potential for future biodiversity credits certification, potentially. So they called upon us, and they asked us to design a monitoring strategy that would answer that question. So it's a beautiful area, and it's beautiful because it has different types of ecosystems that are amazing and contain lots of different kinds of species, from forests to this kind of mosaic of forest and savanna, lots of coastline and mangroves in the north. It also contains lots of different unique species, including African forest elephants. It's very rich in its fish sort of assemblage as well. And so we deployed different monitoring methods, including camera traps, bioacoustics, we did eDNA, and we also mapped land cover and carbon. We went over the top, to be honest. We were a new company, again, we wanted to impress, so we thought, screw it, we'll just do a systematic survey over this massive landscape. So we went out and established camera traps, bioacoustics, sampled different rivers and streams all over the place. It took forever. It was costly. Lots of people got malaria. Lots of people fell in rivers and had to be picked out several hundred meters further down. It was a nightmare, to be honest. But the data set that we got was super rich and enabled us to get out some really cool insights. So on top of the sensors that we placed, or the samples that we collected, we also quantified stuff from remote sensing, such as land cover type, but also, as I mentioned, the carbon potential of the landscape. So this is the Ocala platform, where we now have all the data centralized. I just mentioned this because it's one of the tools that we use to sort of centralize and analyze and process all the data. We then give access to the client, which in this case was both the government and the owner of the land, and they can then take decisions based on the data and the records that are there. So what do we do with all this data? So we used a variety of different species distribution models to predict the number of medium to large mammal species. So you can imagine this as if you placed a camera within a hectare, what's the average number of mammal species that you would detect? Ground mammal species, that is. We did the same for birds. If you placed a bioacoustic sensor in a hectare, what would be the predicted number of bird species that you could expect? And we did the same for fish. Within the river network, if you took a sample of eDNA, what is the expected number of fish families that you would find in that sample? And so we put all that data together, and here I just mentioned the fish, but I'm not going to consider them next. Let me walk you through this slide because it's kind of a data integration, but it's actually sort of more relational. So you have on the y-axis the predicted number of mammal species, on the x-axis the predicted number of bird species. And the colors, the lighter colors, represent areas of forest that have higher carbon potential. Now, the interesting thing here, and it's only one of the interesting things, is that in the high carbon potential areas, you get a very high sort of predicted mammal species richness, but you get a moderate predicted bird species richness. So that kind of influences the type of decisions, the type of management that you're going to make in the forest, right? Whether you're going to restore certain areas or not. We can go into all the ecological explanations for the patterns that we're seeing, but it's just one way of looking at the data to try and pull, really like data-driven decisions out of it. So I'd like to thank, obviously, the members of my team at Ocala, but also the National Parks Agency in Gabon, Space Intelligence that helped us with the remote sensing aspect, and Nature Metrics that helped us with the eDNA. Because the tech, there's rarely one entity can manage all of this tech. It's pretty much impossible. So we need to partner, we need to sort of not reinvent wheels. If someone is doing something ultra well, get in touch with them, work with them, and that really helps move things forward. Thank you very much.
All right, so if we could have everyone who gave a case study come back. No running away just yet. So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A at the moment, pick the brains of our panelists about the presentations that they've just surfaced. Okay, I think that might be difficult with so many people in this room. So I have a couple of questions prepared. But if you guys go to your Whova app and go to the chat section, there's a link to a Google form in there with a single question in it, which are what are your challenges? What are the solutions that you're excited about in multimodal data fusion? As we go through these conversations, if you can drop some thoughts into that Google document, and then we can use that to continue this conversation after this workshop is closed. So this is really fancy, isn't it? So like I said, we've been thinking about some of the things. I think we've brought together a really interesting set of case studies that illustrate a number of different facets of the difficulties that come with multimodal data integration. So I just wanted to start off, and these are for all of you, but I'm going to pick on people. Jonathan, I think something that was really interesting about your talk was the idea of using tech to improve monitoring efficiency. And so I was wondering if you could speak quickly about the value you see in these multimodal approaches, why our single sensor systems might be becoming increasingly inefficient, if that's something that you believe in, and where are these multimodal approaches providing synergistic value for research?
Yeah, so I guess my perspective is as a researcher. So a lot of what I want to do is try and improve how we can do things so that conservation practitioners are doing things in the most efficient way, both in terms of time and money. So I think for me, multimodal studies are really important because, and it's a lot of what I want to do in the future, is looking at, like kind of questioning, do we need a paradigm shift, particularly for large carnival monitoring? Are we doing things correctly just because that's what we've always done? Is there scope to improve and to alter the way that we look and to try and record data? And I'm in a really fortunate position because I can, as a researcher, I have that flexibility to look at those questions and go, can we produce occupancy models in a more time-efficient manner through acoustics compared to camera traps? That's something I can go away and answer, and it's going to be a part of the future work that I do. However, there's an alternative angle of, should everybody just be putting out the most amount of sensors that they can get their hands on? And I'd argue and be really cautious in saying no.
Jeremy.
I think there's an aspect that if you're a small organization that doesn't have a lot of money, and you know that something works, and you know that you're going to produce conservation metrics and outputs that actually you can do something with, do you need to be changing how you approach things? If you know that a camera trap survey is going to produce population density estimates that you can reliably use to inform where to preserve and where to do extra conservation measures, that could be fine. So at the minute, I'd say there should be caution in changing the approach until there's the research that backs up and have that data-driven, research-led approach that leads to this change.
I think that's such a good lead into then the dichotomy I see in the other two case studies that were presented, right? Where we have Ocala deploying hyper-intensively sampling some of these field sites, and then you, Corinne, working with data that was collected not with the idea of using it in a multimodal integrated framework at all. And so you've had to struggle with, what's the word I'm looking for, like retrospectively analyzing that data. And Jeremy, you're very intentionally thinking about survey design moving forward. I don't know, Jeremy, if you could speak a little bit to like how you are designing and thinking about those surveys, and then maybe Corinne, you could finish with a couple of thoughts on what to do with this data that we have and how we can still capitalize on that moving forward.
Thanks, Meredith. So maybe I should stress that if I were to do the case study I presented to you again, I would do it very differently. I wouldn't use all of that tech necessarily. I would be much more targeted in its placement, and I would try and be much more cost effective. And that's kind of what's been driving us at Ocala. So kind of realizing that obviously, as a lot of people have mentioned, throwing out the tech in the field without a plan, just because it's cool technology, it doesn't work. You need to have a plan, you need to have a context-dependent plan, and you need to have a context-dependent and cost-effective plan to deploy the technology. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with lots of data that doesn't necessarily answer the question or the objectives of your project, organization, or whatever it is. So, that being said, I think that primarily what determines what sensors you use, how many and how is, before everything, the ecological question that you are trying to answer. What is the indicator, the insight that you are key to get? Afterwards come questions of budget, come questions of like capacity in the field, etc. But the most important in everything is if you can get to your question or your objective with one sensor type, go for it. If you need 8 to get like sufficient data or insights, then that's another side of things, and you need to consider that. So super important to have a plan, and that's what we try and do at Ocala now. We try and basically sit people down and say, right, what are your objectives? What's your budget? What do you need to do? It's key to getting the good results at the end.
And what do you do when you don't have a plan?
Is that my question? So I think the way I might turn that around is that we have biological stations scattered across the Amazon, scattered across the globe. At those places, people have been building this body of knowledge, right? It's a place where a whole bunch of different researchers come, ask different questions, and you start to really know a place deeply. But for example, in the Amazon, we've had 2 years of really severe droughts. We've had, in the last 10 years, historic floods. We haven't quite figured out how to take data from stations scattered around the Amazon, ask bigger questions about what's happening. And so I think, to me, it feels like it's not necessarily that there's not a plan, it's that there is really local research done in a place that now gives you an opportunity to potentially ask bigger questions. And now that we have this revolution in tech, it offers you an opportunity to do like what Sparrow and Providence are doing and saying, we have these modules and we can put them in different places. And so you have the same sampling, hopefully same sampling design, but same sampling unit that might allow you to scale some of your research. And I think we just need to have really clear research questions around those units, and we need to know something about power. Like I feel like what you're saying, you would do it differently. You wouldn't put all those units out, and I think we need to be able to give not just biological stations. I was talking to folks from the Park Service last night here in Peru, in Suriname. They have a whole park system, and they're saying, what sort of monitoring should we do, and how do we set it up in these parks? A lot like your example, Jeremy, like how do we set this up, replicate it, so that we can say something not just about that place, but about a much bigger geography. And so I'm sure there are people who are thinking about this, and I haven't gone to those talks, but I would love to think about how much power do you need, how can you scale insights, and how do we start out with sort of overarching ecological questions that we want to answer?
We've been thinking a lot about the purpose of multimodal data monitoring and the questions that are driving it. Do we know of time for questions? Okay. Guys, thank you so much for doing such a brilliant job of surfacing all of these challenges that we're going to look forward to solving completely in our next fireside chat. Thank you, guys. All right. right, we're going to get another flash round of introductions. Some people on the stage maybe don't need them. So we're now moving into the fireside chat portion of the session, where we've convened some real pioneers working at the forefront of designing and scaling solutions to these challenges. So the idea here is that we're hoping to take this cross-sector, multidisciplinary perspective on how to tackle these issues and to look ahead to where the field of multimodal environmental monitoring is heading. So delighted to introduce our panelists, starting with Dr. Seamus Lombardo, a researcher focused on geospatial data science for environmental and humanitarian applications. Seamus sits on the impact team at Planet Labs, where he works to integrate satellite data with in-situ nature technologies for ecosystem monitoring. Hopefully you all went to this morning's plenary with Sarah Beery, assistant professor at MIT, focused on building computer vision methods that enable global scale environmental biodiversity monitoring, works across many modalities, does a lot of capacity building, has received many recognitions for it. Excited to have you here. And finally, we have Dr. Tova Siegel, senior scientist at the Bezos Earth Fund. Tova, you've worked on climate change and policy in many different sectors, White House, Washington, correct? As well as with the Smithsonian and various NGOs. Tova's current work is on advancing science-driven solutions to address climate change and to protect nature, and we're hoping that you can share some lessons learned from supporting the recent Bezos Earth Fund. So I think I wanted to start this conversation off with really introducing the landscape of what our current options are in terms of dealing with these different data streams. So Seamus, you've recently put out a paradigms paper on this. If you could take a moment to kind of lay out what methods and frameworks are currently available for combining or complementing different data streams, what approaches are being used, what's working well, and also like what's being underutilized, like where does the potential lie there that people aren't necessarily thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. So at Planet, we're really interested in ways to integrate broad area satellite data, which can tell you things about ecosystem extent or forest structure, with in situ biodiversity monitoring that can tell you more about how wildlife is doing below the canopy. And so we've been working through our biodiversity data grant program and our other collaborations with conservationists and scientists in the field to kind of distill these different workflows for integrating these multiple data streams. And in the new preprint that we've got out, one of our highest level takeaways, and kind of relates to what some of the earlier folks were saying about the newest, shiniest things, is that, you know, while some of the coolest forms of AI data fusion are getting a lot of publicity, and we will certainly talk about those on this panel. There are other really important ways that you can integrate multiple data streams that are more targeted towards what your research questions might be, like what our panelists were saying earlier. And so these can be things like survey design. Perhaps a satellite-derived land cover or ecosystem type map helps inform the stratification or deployment of your in situ passive acoustic monitoring. Or it can be validation. So maybe a low confidence eDNA species detection is validated by a higher confidence modality like a camera trap. And you know, we found overall that this space is definitely still nascent and growing. But when we look at these things through the paradigms, we can distill opportunities. And so, for example, our most common paradigm is the one here in the bottom left, consilience, where you kind of have two different data streams, you analyze them in parallel, you're not directly combining them in any computational way, but you are kind of drawing conclusions from them. And we found that, you know, this is a great entry point for folks with multimodal data, and it can lead to more rigorous, complex forms of data integration like interpolation and extrapolation or data fusion. And to the last part of your question, we also found some opportunities because, you know, we had a lot of great case studies from around the world that were using these different paradigms and different data streams, but a lot of these integrations were ad hoc or manual. And so I think an opportunity is automation, integration, streamlining these things. For example, in our tip and cue paradigm, you might have an automated system where some phenomena, like forest degradation, is detected in the satellite data and then tips you to automatically cue the deployment of in-situ sensors or increase the cadence of already deployed sensors to really understand better the effects under the canopy of that phenomena that you're detecting from space.
I think, all right, something we have to talk about maybe at the end of all this is something I found really interesting about these paradigms in these papers is pulling in these concepts from different fields that aren't ecology or statistics, thinking about some of these concepts from the remote sensing space that could inform how we do ecological monitoring moving forward. So hopefully we'll have time for that at the end. So Sarah, Seamus's hot take is that AI is not the answer to everything. So where is AI appropriate in data integration? And what is the state of that right now? What are you doing with AI in multimodal data? And are there things blocking you from moving forward? Like how can we make AI useful in this space?
I mean, I feel like my hot take is always also that AI is not the answer to everything. Like, as someone who is like building AI systems, I'm constantly like, stop trying to use AI for that. That's not an AI problem. So yeah, I really appreciate this framing as well. And I think one of the things that's so interesting, or that I've been thinking about a lot when we think about these spaces of like multimodal data and ecology, is trying to reference that back to the types of multimodal success we have had in AI and understand sort of the similarities and differences in the data landscape that lead to that type of, like, let's call it like scaling factor in terms of capability. And I think like one thing that's very, very interesting here is just the idea of like alignment across the modalities. Often, like a lot of the stuff that we've seen in multimodal AI, and here I'm talking about like vision language models, video audio models, these models that are kind of like able to learn across modalities to do something. Here, it's like you're using the fact that the modalities are aligned as a training signal that comes for very cheap, and you assume you have a huge amount of aligned data where like the alignment is useful to help you build an AI model. And the other thing that I think is a kind of implicit assumption in a lot of those technologies is that the important information will be the information that is shared across all of them. So most of our kind of like contrastive learning techniques, our self-supervised learning techniques for really large-scale multimodal AI, they're focused around this idea that we're going to be able to capture the shared information across modalities, and that is good enough. And then when I think about taking that to the ecology landscape, where actually so much of what we're looking at is the fact that we put out all these different types of data because they capture distinct information from each other. And when they're not well aligned in space and time, the amount of information that is shared is at best trivial, and at worst non-existent. Like there's the strategies that we have for dealing with multimodality in AI, the successes we've seen, maybe the reason it's so trendy right now, I don't even know if those assumptions hold in the spaces that we're working in. And I actually think where I'm kind of interested here, and maybe also tying back to the talk I gave this morning, there are ways to think about computational methodologies that tie into all of these things that can help us kind of like optimize and benefit from what we do have, but start breaking down the assumptions that we're making about what it means to try to do multimodal data fusion to bring it back to like the actual ecological use case. Now, where I am really excited is I think there's a lot of work that's gone into observing species with multimodality, and we've designed sensors that are like pretty good at observing species. And then when you start building these like multimodal systems, like if you have an image of a bird and also the audio of a bird, for the vast majority of birds, the image is enough, right? Like the audio doesn't really help you that much more disentangle species. And maybe by adding the audio, you can tell the difference between like crows and ravens. But in the grand scheme of your question, if you want to do this for like every species on Earth, like most of the time, the added value of that additional modality of data for species observation, it's not there, right? Like the benchmarks we've seen, we're seeing like a tiny gain in performance versus like a huge amount of cost when we're putting all of these modalities together. But I've been thinking a lot about data reuse, and particularly like how we can think about this in situ data not just as the species observation dimension, but actually how we can use it to provide ecological context. And I think that's kind of exciting, because I think you don't just need to have like the same type of image on the ground. Like you can leverage all the iNaturalist images on the ground, all the pictures that people have from camera traps on the ground. You go for a hike and bring a GoPro, and like now these like ecological features that are captured in those images, or these acoustic signals, I think that's maybe where we will start to see the first real benefits here, because it's going to help us build ecological context that is much more capturing the microhabitats, maybe the dimensions of the habitat that will change fastest that we might not be able to see from space. So trying to think critically and from an ecological lens about where we expect the information to actually add significant complementary benefit, and then focus our methodological efforts there.
I want to make sure, Tova, that you get a chance to talk about kind of like, I think you have insight into sort of the future of this space. But Seamus, did you want to respond to that, what Sarah said? I think there's some interesting stuff there about the complementarity of data sets versus the shared information that you can get from different data streams that speaks to these different paradigms.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with all of those points, but one of the things that we're excited about with satellite data in particular is that point on co-registration, right? And so like, you know, we can be intentional, and folks like Jeremy are working to be more intentional about co-registering these in situ data sets. But with something like satellite data, especially when it's high resolution, near daily satellite data that's properly geo-rectified and has a nice consistent timestamp, it's not dependent on any individual field campaign. It's gonna be up there on orbit taking images every day for years on end. You do have that kind of opportunity for co-registration, at least between, you know, some in situ modalities and the satellite data. So that's one of the opportunities we're eager to exploit at Planet.
So speaking of exploiting opportunities, so Tova, you've been involved in the Bezos Earth Fund, and I think you have really great oversight of some of these emerging paradigms that would need to be funded and tested and interrogated and developed. And so I was wondering if you could describe a little bit about the fund and your work in that fund, and about, I don't know yet if you have insights into some of the projects and what they're returning in terms of developing new paradigms for data integration.
This is super exciting because I did my PhD. I'm an ecologist actually by training. And when I did my PhD, I used 40 years of data from the BDFFP, the Biological Dynamics of Forest Fragments project. And I basically had to look at species interactions. And so we were using the forest plots and mist netting data. And so seeing a conference like this where there's so much technology and there's so much AI, although not the solution, but an important plug-in, I agree with that, makes me think that my PhD would have been a lot easier if this had happened a couple of years ago. So just really exciting to see the landscape and how things are moving, and hopefully an ability to kind of do that retrospective, integrating AI and integrating some of these technologies so that future PhD students like me don't have to be in Excel trying to figure out how to clean up 40 years of data. And let me tell you, as you all know very well, it's not easy.
PTSD.
Yeah, a lot of trauma there, a lot of years of therapy,
so much trauma.
trying to get over that. But it's been really exciting since then to join the Bezos Earth Fund. So for those of you that aren't familiar, we were a fund created in about 2020 with a $10 billion commitment from Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez Bezos to basically protect nature and help address climate change. And we've grown in the last 5 years, and one of the really exciting areas that we've kind of touched into and are hoping to expand way more into is kind of the tech AI space. So one of the things I was asked to talk about was our AI for Climate and Nature Grand Challenge, which is where I'll talk about kind of what we've been thinking on this, what we've done, and then maybe where we're going from there. And so this was a challenge launched in 2024 to basically look at how AI could help advance climate and nature outcomes. We did it with an open call for proposals. In 2024, we got about 1,000 proposals in 4 areas. So we asked for proposals based on biodiversity conservation, sustainable proteins, power grid optimization, and wildcard for any of the unconventional ideas that may not necessarily fit into one of those groupings. And we did this in 2 interesting phases. The first phase was basically to surface and strengthen concepts, And the second phase, the idea was to deploy and measure impact. And between those two phases, we did an innovation sprint. And I'll go into the details about how each of those phases worked out. But basically, out of that more than 1,000 applications, we selected 24 awards for the first phase, $50,000 each. And we asked those grantees to work with collaborators in the tech space to improve those proposals. So one of the things that I'm really interested in learning more about and hearing from other folks in this room is kind of like, how do we bridge that space between conservation tech and tech that's outside of the conservation space and bring that into the work that we're doing for the user. And so we had collaborators like AWS, Google.org, NVIDIA, Esri, all tapped in and kind of worked with these 24 grantees to strengthen those proposals, which then went under a reevaluation. And from that, we selected 15 grantees who each received up to $2 million to actually implement their work. It was super exciting, and I wish I had more lessons learned just because this second phase just began earlier this year, so we haven't actually seen the outcomes. But there's some really exciting work that's being done within this challenge. We have things like acoustic monitors and threat detection, looking at kind of like biome scale foundational models for acoustics and how we might be able to kind of advance that biodiversity monitoring. We've done one of the AI Grand Challenge winners was looking at herbarium species discoveries. So how do you use some of the specimens or the resources and repositories that we already have in order to identify species, integrating computer vision and vision language. We also have some cool work in the oceans, never want to forget the oceans, looking at reef monitoring and global mapping, and just kind of how do you apply AI to really get at these big conservation and climate issues, just because it's such an important plugin, and we're on the precipice of what feels, although people keep saying that, we're on the precipice of this big change. And it feels like we're there, and I'm excited to kind of see where we might be able to plug in to support other folks who are really trying to integrate innovative technology and AI to really push the envelope on what we can do for climate and nature.
Okay, I have some thoughts. I just want to do a time check. Can we do one more interesting question? No more interesting question? Amy, okay. Amy, don't do that. Okay, so I want to ask everyone just one final question, like one big takeaway to leave everyone thinking about. And I think what I'd be curious in hearing from everyone is, like, coming off of what you've just said, or what everyone's just said, like, what's going to unlock the capacity for us to do this better? The funding, the collaborations, these cross-sector partnerships, these pulling solutions in from other domains as we see in these different paradigms. Like, is there a low-hanging fruit? Is there one big innovation that will unlock a lot of potential? Like, what's the one thing you would want to tackle next to move this field forward? I'm gonna start with you, Seamus.
Okay. Yeah, I think, going back to what the panelists said earlier, I think really the biggest opportunity is just, moving beyond shiny things to really being intentional about this. And I think, these paradigms are just a first step, and we're eager to refine them with you. That's what we want to do in the dialogue circle. But just having like a shared community of folks who kind of have workflows that you can select or lean on based on your research question, and not just kind of, go, oh, this is a really cool thing. I'm feeling a lot of pressure to employ this newest technology or this newest technique, but really building a community of practice with a little bit more resources and foundation that will allow people to scale based on what's really appropriate for them.
I like the theme of intentionality. I think that resonates. Sarah?
I mean, even listening to you talk about the set of what sounds like a really exciting and quite diverse group of goals, I think it's so enlightening in terms of like the almost like diversity of questions that we want to ask in this space. I think one of the things that is really hard when you're trying to talk about like, oh, like what's the one thing that's gonna change everything is like, unfortunately, ecology is really contextual. Like, what question you want to ask deeply informs what adds value. And some of the questions you want to ask, maybe you can start trying to address with the data that already exists. And some of them, like, you need to collect new information to even get started. And then so many of the questions we care about have time horizons that are like 10, 20 years. And so AI likes to move quick. We like get rich quick schemes, and like, you're not gonna get those wins tomorrow, you know? Like if the idea is you're building a technology that you're going to deploy to understand like large scale changes relative to climate change of nature. So I am with you on the intentionality, I'm with you on the excitement about technology, but I think actually maybe one of the fun thought exercises for all of us is trying to figure out like, what are the shared tools? Like, you know, what are the pieces of all of these different paradigms that might rely on things that are at least a little bit universal? Right. And I don't think there is gonna be like one tool that's really necessary, but it's really interesting to me to try and think about like, okay, so, you know, we talked about the mega detector earlier. Doesn't matter what you're trying to do with your camera trap data, if you're working on animals, something that helps you find the animals faster is pretty generally useful. Like, what are the set of like generally useful tools that might have like shared value across different types of ecological questions, and hopefully that are kind of easy because that's what AI is good at? And can we like build those tools so that they're in the toolbox and accessible across these paradigms? I think that's maybe the right starting point.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think that it kind of feeds into my thought process of like, think big as you focus small. The idea being that like, let's really identify where the bottlenecks are. It's really cool to get data. I mean, I've got my ecology background. Like, I love biodiversity. I love monitoring. I think it's so exciting. I love to see what critters are out there. But simultaneously, we really need to address so many of these problems from the user lens. What does this technology achieve? What does this data do? Do we need more data? Is there a data gap? Maybe we need access. There's all these questions that kind of come into identifying where the true bottlenecks are, and then seeing how we can work across all of our needs to see if those bottlenecks are shared, as you put, and if we can really innovate in that space in order to really unlock the future of what this field could be.
And if I can add to that, like, don't let the computer scientists make that call for you. Like, this community knows what's important. And I think so many of the kind of failure modes we've seen with well-intentioned technology is you let a computer scientist who doesn't understand the problems very well decide for you what you need, right? If you can figure out what you need, then people will build it. It's like working with ChatGPT. If you tell it what you want and you're good at telling it what you want, it'll try to build something for you that might be helpful. But if you're not good at specifying what the needs are, you end up with well-intentioned, useless technology.
Guys, I'm going to cut us off now so that we can continue having these conversations, but together, collaboratively with everyone in the audience. Thank you so much for surfacing all of these different paths forward. And you were supposed to provide solutions, but you just provided more challenges. But I think we've got some direction here that we could maybe iterate on. So thank you all for your time up here. And I think we're going to move into a discussion-based, here we go, discussion-based space. Thank you, guys.